Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video we'll be working on the GX470. I've got the last oil leak that I have to deal with on this vehicle. Hopefully it's the last oil leak. It's the rear main seal. And usually if you're leaking near the transmission bell housing between the engine and the transmission, it's generally the rear main seal, but it's not the actual seal itself. It's the O-ring inside and the seal around the plate that's leaking. So on today's video we're going to go ahead and lower the transmission and get that all out of the vehicle so we could change that seal. So we'll go ahead and go through all the steps of removing the transmission and all that. Luckily I've got this lift behind me in my garage, my max jack, that's going to make this much easier. Most of you guys trying to do this are probably going to be doing it on your back or on jack stands on the floor. But you know, I've done that in the past with the 2JZ and I've had enough of it. That's why I love having this lift in my garage and doing this stuff with the lift. So we'll go ahead and get started on this, so stay tuned. You're going to need the rear main seal right here. That's the part number 905013. That's for the 2UZ motor. I think the VVTi or the regular ones all use the same exact one. Then you're going to need the O-ring. Right here you see I've got two O-rings. You only need one of those O-rings. So that's the part number right there, the OEM part number. I had originally ordered all this stuff from Japan, so I ordered a second set just in case something happened or I need it for another motor. In addition to the seals, you're going to need packing material. This is basically the Toyota's oil sealing form in place gasket, the 103. So you're going to need some of that. This is what I used in my recent video on resealing the oil pan and actually doing the timing belt and all the seals and everything above by the cam. So you're going to need some of that to do the project. So one of the things when you order these seals, even if you get them online or from an OEM source, one of the things you want to do is always make sure the seal that you're putting back in matches the one you take out. The OEM seal is an NOK, and right here the part number is BH4036H. The one you take out should be the same numbers, at least the BH436 part of it. A lot of times they might have different variations over the years, and that H on the back end might be the next letter up, but you always want to make sure that these are the numbers you got. I've had it in the past where I've gotten burnt on the rear main seal where the one I took out was a different number and I put back in the new one. Even though it was an NOK, it wasn't the exact ribs and the exact measurements, and it actually leaked right after I put it in, so I had to redo that shit again. So one of the tools you need, especially if you have a lift at home or in your shop, is a transmission jack right here. I got this one from Vivor. On my recent video of this, I actually assembled it because I found all the reviews, everybody was complaining about not knowing how to assemble it or putting the wheels all wrong and all that, and everybody was complaining about the casters too, how they come with metal casters that don't roll well. So on this one I actually upgraded the casters to some new $25 ones that are actually plastic. It's a hard plastic that rolls much better, so this thing right now just rolls freely on my floor and it doesn't mark up the floor or anything. So check out that video if you want to see this, and check out the links in the description for the exact same tool. These things are pretty affordable. It's less than $200. I think you get this basically shipped to your door for $180 to $185, and the thing weighs 95 pounds, the box did, so it does cost a lot for them to ship it to you, but it's a good deal for a tool that you're probably going to find much more use out of than just the transmission. You can lift gas tanks, you can lift differentials, you can lift anything under the vehicle up or hold it up while you're working under it. So underneath the vehicle you'll see that leak right there. It's a slow drip. It doesn't really leave anything on the ground or anything, but it does make a big old mess here, and then it makes a big old mess on your transmission pan right here over time. You can see I put a little old t-shirt rag down here to catch some of the oil. When I actually have the cover on here, I had more of this stuff just to soak up the oil so it didn't leak on the ground or on my driveway. So the first thing we want to do is remove all the components around here. So if you look online, there's not many videos that detail taking this transmission or this whole setup out of a GX470. I've found bits and pieces from different vehicles like the 4Runner and some of the other vehicles that may have this similar setup. Timmy the tool man, he actually has a video on a 4Runner where he takes out the transfer case and takes out the transmission on a 4Runner, which is a very similar setup. It's not exact, but a lot of the steps he does actually is the same on the GX470. The GX470 factory service manual actually has you remove the whole assembly as one complete piece without separating the transfer case. That's what I'm going to do today. Since I have the transmission jack, I'm going to try to place it where I get a good balance, because this thing's going to be a little long and huge. So I'm going to go ahead and have actually a second support back here to try to get it all down. But yeah, if you're doing this at home on the ground, it might be a good idea to try to take the transfer case out and then do the transmission. But on this project today, we're going to try to take this all out in one piece. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and take apart the drive shafts. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and go on every one of these connections, just mark a alignment mark, so that way when you get the unit back in, that you match that up. It's for balancing purposes, and you want to make sure you do that. As far as the slip yoke, you're going to have a slip yoke right here. You want to also mark this thing because it's balanced, so you want to mark on here and then on this side, so that way it lines up in case your slip yoke comes apart for some reason. The same with the front transfer case. You want to go ahead and mark both sides right there on the front and the back side, where you actually take it apart and unbolt it. And then this is also on a slip yoke right there in the middle. Go ahead and mark those slip yokes, so that way you can take it all out in one piece. Also, when we start unbolting these after we mark everything, you want to go ahead, put the vehicle in neutral and kind of leave it in neutral, so that way we can spin the transmission and spin this drive shaft and get to all the bolts all around without much problem. On here, pretty much you want to get a breaker bar in to loosen all these, and then once you loosen them, you can shoot them off. Generally in the past, where I've done it on the 2JZ and other vehicles, that's the easiest way. You could try to shoot it with an impact too, but I don't want to risk damaging anything, so I just go ahead and use a small breaker bar and try to break these things off before I unscrew them all. Also, for my case, since I recently changed the fluid in the transfer case, and I'm going to eventually change the fluid in the transmission, I don't want to drain it today. I'm going to try to make sure I lower it without spilling anything. So the only connection that's going to be troublesome is when we unbolt this right here. This is the cooler connection. I'm going to go ahead and loop the two hard lines so I don't lose much there, and put some plugs on that fitting right there, so that way I don't lose anything out of the transmission while I'm working on it. So for the factory service manual, they also want you to remove the exhaust. On here, when I'm looking at it, theoretically you don't need to remove this piece right here or that piece, but since it's all connected on the same Y yoke right here, including this spot, you might be better just to unbolt it right here and then unbolt it at the cats on both sides and take it all out in one piece, or maybe even separate right here so you can take that piece out and this piece out, and then that way it frees up a little bit more room to work with down here. You don't have to worry about hitting the exhaust when you're going down. You do have the O2 sensors and everything that you have to unplug. That's all part of the harness on the transmission that you have to take apart anyway, so you want to take all that out so you don't risk damaging your O2 sensors for any reason. All right, those drive shafts came off pretty easily. You just gotta be able to tap them before you loosen that last bolt or after you loosen that last bolt just to get it loose. I learned it from that one over here. So the ones on the transfer case, these are actually pressed in studs that don't come out. They have a 17mm head on the back of them, so you can hold on to it to take apart. And then the front ones have the screw, the front and the back ones have a screw and a nut, so those are pretty easy. Once you break it, you can pretty much turn it by hand. So we got both the drive shafts down here. One of the things I noticed on these drive shafts, they have these little zert fittings for grease. I didn't even know that was a thing on the Lexus vehicles, because on the IS300 and stuff, I don't think they have any of that. So that's a good thing to keep up with as far as greasing and maintenance on those, to make sure you squeeze in some grease every once in a while to make sure those U-joints are greased up. Now that we've got the drive shafts out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and start unbolting all the exhaust bolts that we need to take this thing down. Go ahead and unplug the O2 sensors and get those things all out of the way, so we go ahead and unbolt it and take it down. So we're gonna take it down right here before the rear shaft, and then up here on those two front ones to the catalytic converter. You could also loosen this one. So this one looks like on this side, it's actually welded the nut. So you have to unbolt the screw side on the back to take this one out right here. All right, we'll unbolt all those and get it out. I had one little casualty here. Even though I got all the nuts basically loosened on this side, for some reason it got caught up and it stripped this stud right here, but I still have enough to tighten. But then this one broke off because I had to force it out because I couldn't get the nut out. So I'm basically stuck there. I don't know how I'm gonna get that thing out. I'm gonna have to either drill it out and re-tap that hole, or see if I could take the thread out from the backside, because this thing's a stud that goes through. But I figure since it didn't spin, that thing is pretty much seized in there too. So I might have to go ahead and drill that out off camera to fix that. This one back here came out pretty easy. This is a spring-loaded one. It's a 14, and then it has a little gasket in there. That gasket looks like it's still pretty decent shape. I'll leave that in there. The other three that came out, they're pretty much all rotten and worn out. I do have replacements for these. I had ordered those preemptively, so I have those replacements there. So I was able to save that hole by drilling it out, and I saved most of the threads in there. I just re-tapped it, so I just need to find a new exhaust bolt or stud to get into there. I'll probably just use a bolt to make it easier instead of this stud, unless I could get one for cheap from the dealer. So next part of the removal is going ahead, disconnecting all the wire harnesses that you can see on both sides of the engine. One of the things you want to do is the ones that have these clips right here, it's much easier just to take the 10mm bracket off on the back side here and just let it dangle down than it is to try to unbuckle those things and try to take those clips out of the actual mount and brackets. So you got that, you got a breather or a vacuum hose up here that connects the transmission to the transfer case. You could go ahead and disconnect that to make it a little bit easier, even though since we're taking it all down in one piece, it doesn't really matter on that one. It should be fine if you can leave it, but I want to go ahead and disconnect that just in case. But right here you can see like a little wire, here's a little wire clip thing that kind of holds the vacuum to the harness. So all this stuff on my vehicle is pretty easy to get to and pretty clean, because this undercarriage is kind of spotless compared to some of the stuff that you're going to find up north. You can see all the harnesses on the driver's side right here, pretty much the exact same situation. There is the 10mm that just holds the bracket on. You get a gear wrench up into there, and easier to get that off than instead of trying to pry the clip off. That same wire harness extends back over here to the transfer case. On the transfer case, you just basically have to disconnect all those clips that go into the harnesses that's on the side of the actual transfer case. And the whole harness comes loose in a way. Same with this right here, you can see that bracket, just go ahead and unbolt that. But this one's pretty easy, so you could theoretically just get a little clip and pop this thing off of that, but you want to get this out of the way just for one less thing to deal with. After you're done with all the harnesses, you go ahead and disconnect the shift linkage. The shift linkage is held by a 10mm right here, and then this little bracket right here, just pop that thing out with a pair of pliers and just take the whole cable, put it off to the side out of the way. Aside from the harnesses and all that, there's a ground wire right here that you want to probably disconnect. It's held on by, I think, a 12mm into this bracket right here. You can undo that, or you can undo it right here on the actual chassis, which might be easier to reach right here with a 10mm, and just undo that and get it out of the way so it doesn't hold up when you pull up. On here, you can see on this mechanism, here's one of those plugs that's part of that harness that you could just unplug pretty easily back here by just clipping it and just sliding it out of the way right here. As far as inside the vehicle, the factory service manual recommends that you go inside the vehicle, disassemble the actual center console, and then remove the shifter for the transfer case. All right, we're inside the vehicle, so first thing you want to do is just go ahead, take your shift knob apart. Once you do that, we can start popping all the trim around here. So what you want to do is just spin this thing off. It's just like a regular shift knob on a manual transmission. The shifter is actually just like a manual transmission anyways. So the first place you want to start is just get your little trim tool right here that's non-marking. Pop this piece right here, and then you can take apart the side trims. It gives you access to that wood trim. Once you do that, you just pull these things out. To give a little bit more room, just pull your e-brake up, pop that out right there, pull this thing apart. The other thing is, you want to go ahead and just take this off because this whole trim is all part of it. So you could just go ahead and unscrew the regular shift knob, and then there's a zipper right here for the e-brake to take the trim off on this side. So go ahead and zip that out. Okay, go ahead right there. This thing just is a little clip that goes into the shift knob. So once we do that, now it looks like we could pop everything. Okay, pop everything in one. Oh shit. So this side, let me go get my trim tool and pop this side with both hands, and I think we should be able to get this whole thing out. There it goes. So once we do that, go ahead, pull it all out of the way. Let me unplug all the wires behind here, and I'll show you guys what's. So this thing was pretty easy to get out once you figure it out. So it's just two trim pieces on the side, and pretty much just pop these things up all around. One plug, even though you got a bunch of plugs up here, it all goes back to one master plug that plugs right here by the shifter, and that's pretty much it. So we'll go ahead, put this thing aside and take care of what's underneath here. So this thing right here is what we're trying to take apart, and what it's held on with is a bunch of 10mm all around here on the trim, and you could pretty much unscrew those and then get access to it. So to access those 4 screws, you basically have to break away this old sound deadening stuff. Most of these cars by now is just brittle plastic and rubber. So you want to go get one here. This one over here is kind of stuck behind here, so you might have to undo the actual shift linkage right here and push it off to the side to access this one bolt here. This one you can get to similar. It's kind of in the way, so you just got to unbolt these 12mm and just slide the shifter out of the way. Once you unbolt those 412s, you can kind of just slide this thing out of the way to access those 10mm on both sides. You don't even have to remove it. You just kind of move it out of the way just to get the socket and the extension down into there so you can get to those 10mm. Once you get those 4 10mm out, they're just little screws into some grommets right there. Go ahead, get a little flathead or something, pry this thing up because the rubber is actually holding it down, or you could just try to yank on it. But yeah, once you yank on it, it comes loose, and then you just get this whole thing out of the way, and it'll give you access to the top of the transfer case there. Once you take that boot out, basically you're looking at the top of the transfer case. You've got your shift knob here, and then this boot that slips over this guy right here. Once you take that off, you'll see a snap ring right here, and that snap ring, if you squeeze that together with a pair of pliers, or even with your hand, you can take that ring off and then slide this whole thing out. The only problem with that is once you do that, your top of here is exposed and open, and if you tip over or anything, you're going to end up leaking all your transfer case fluid out. So for now, I'm going to leave it like this because I think I can still lower it right now with it in this position and kind of clear everything once we go down. So if I have any issues, once I have it down on moving it around and clearance, because the height of this thing, I'll go ahead and unbolt it or take it out when it's down on the actual lift. Once we're done disconnecting everything, the last thing we want to do is undo the cooler hoses right here. So this is a flare wrench, a 17mm flare right here that you're gonna need, and then you need just a wrench right here just to hold that so it doesn't break. But this thing's on pretty tightly. I remember on my 2JZ, I ended up twisting a lot of this stuff trying to do it, but I didn't use my flare wrench at the time because I didn't realize I had the flare wrench, so I was just using a regular open-ended 17 and I kept slipping, but it did spin this thing. I ended up having to bend it back correctly. But as far as taking it off, you want to unbolt the bracket right here. That's a 12mm into the bell housing. Then up front there's another bracket which is a 10mm into the engine block right there. You want to unbolt both of those so you get the hard lines, a little bit of free play to move around, because once you unbolt it, you want to go ahead and plug these lines up because they're going to drip transmission fluid. Once we get all the harnesses and everything done, you can start doing the bell housing bolts. So most of the bell housing bolts are pretty easy and you can access from underneath here, even from there on this spot right above the exhaust. Same with that side. The last two on the very top of the actual bell housing are going to be the most difficult ones. All right, I got everything off on this side. I unbolted that thing up. I left the bolt up there in the hole, so you want to do that whenever you take apart a bunch of bolts so you don't forget where they're at. The only casualty we have is this plug right here. It was just too brittle and it actually snapped on the inside there. If you guys didn't know, if you look at the back of these things, there's a number on it and it corresponds to the part number of the actual replacement that you can order. So in this particular one, if you look on the back side, it's 1156, and I have that one right here is the part number. So all harness plugs start with 90980, and the last 5 numbers there are actually printed on the plug. So one thing I noticed about that 11156 plug right there, it's a very common plug because it's used for all the lights, the little corner lights and everything, and the 193 light bulbs right here that you see, that's very common. So I have a bunch of these and I realized it's the same exact plug. So if you don't have access or you don't want to order ones, you just go to the junkyard and just pull a bunch of these plugs if you need to replace those brittle ones. Alright, we went ahead and unplugged it. Again, this is the exact same plug as the other side, the 11156. Back there, that bracket, that one, the 10mm was a little bit hard, and it's also in a hard location. So you gotta get a box wrench and get it up in there and get it firmly in place to unbolt it. So you gotta do that one. This one, you can just unbolt right there. I ended up popping it out of the clips and out of here and then just putting that back in. This guy right here is a little bit harder. You actually have to pull it down and pull it with force because there's a little clip back here. There's a button that locks into this top spot right here, and then you have to pull it down, and then when you pull it down, it actually releases the clip and then you slide it right up. So now we pretty much got everything. The ones on top there, the black ones that hold the harness, those are a little bit easier to get to because you can actually push the little button on top and pull those by hand. So I was able to do both of those on the front and the back here. So we got that. And then now we have to go back to the ones on the transfer case, and this harness should be fully loose after that. we were able to get everything. So remember, these clips right here are on the top of the transmission. You just got to get something on the top of it, kind of pull it out. So using a little pick tool or something is probably the easiest way to reach it, because these last two on top here are a pain to get to. That one right there was a big ass pain because it was all the way up there, and it's very hard to get to unless you have really small hands. This one right here, the top plug, you end up just having put a little flathead screwdriver from the back forward, and it pops out. That's that connector right here. That's the gray connector. You can see inside that thing, this is the clip. It's really hard to press on that side, so getting a flathead through the front here is the best way. This one is actually the same part number as the first two we broke up there, but it's a different material, so it's not brittle. It's that black one that's always so brittle. That's probably why the new replacement ones are all white. So we'll go ahead, get this thing out of the way, and we're pretty much done disconnecting everything on the transmission that we can lower. So we were able to undo the shift linkage there. Pretty easy, just 12mm unbolted from the arm right there, the little shift arm, and then that little clip, you slide out with a pair of pliers and it comes right out. Back here, once we take care of everything else, we'll go ahead and take off these two support braces right here to the frame. So these things need to come off because we're gonna eventually have to take this crossbar down when we take everything else down. So the crossbar is held on with the bolts, 4 bolts on each side there. After we take care of everything on the back side, we'll go ahead and take the bell housing bolts apart. So what you got is you're going to end up having 4 14mm on the lower half here, and then you're going to have 6 of the 17mm starting with this one, that one on each side, and the 2 hardest ones on top. So we'll go ahead and just break those that we can reach, and then pretty much take out the 14s because we don't need to worry about those right now. Same with the ones up top. I'll probably leave 2 of these right now until we take the flex plate bolts off and take everything else out, but we'll go ahead and just break what we can. So the last 2 on there, what we're going to use is these long ass extensions. I bought these a few years ago when I was doing my 2JZ swap on the transmission on that. So this thing's come in useful plenty of times already on doing these transmissions. So I just put 2 of these long ones together. I think that's a 2-footer and this is an 18-incher, and that's probably a 12-incher or 15-incher right there, but all you need is 2 of them for this one to get to it. I put a flex head up here, a little joint, the universal joint right there, and then a 17 on that, and then I'm gonna just go ahead, try to break it from the back and see if it works. I'll show you in a second how to get it in there. So once you sit in this angle and you have all the wiring harnesses out of the way, you can pretty much see that bolt right here, get it right into there, and then just try to line it up as straight as possible, so when you break it, you don't have to put too much stress on that joint. So you just, you get it right into there, and then you have enough room back here to put your breaker bar or your ratchet with the bar to get it out. Oh fuck. Perfect. Got that thing broken, so now I've got this thing on a drill right here, and we just go ahead and just unscrew it. Once you get it loose, just grab your magnet, put it right up to there, and pull it right out. So on the driver's side is the exact same position. We could pretty much see it from here using a light. It's hard to see on camera, but we'll go ahead, put it up there and break this one out and take it off also. All right, that came in clutch, these two long extensions right here. It does get kind of sketchy trying to break it because it feels like you're just flexing the hell out of that thing, and when it does finally snap, it seems like this thing just breaks. But luckily the 17 millimeters aren't torqued that tight. I think there may be like 56 to 62 foot-pounds. So I've got the last two kind of still holding it on there. Next thing we're gonna do is go ahead, take out that front cover right here, do the 6 flex plate bolts. All right, to access the flex plate, we'll go ahead, take apart that 12 millimeter, or is that a 14? I think that's a 14 right there. And then that whole black plate comes off, and then you can access all the bolts for it. There's 6 of them. You're gonna go ahead and have to get a 22 millimeter to get it onto the crankshaft right here, so we can turn the crankshaft and get to that as we go around. Once you take that plate off, you can see there's a 12 millimeter right there, right in the center right there. So we're gonna need to go ahead, take off 6 of these. So the access to this thing is a kind of a pain in the ass, because what you have is you have this cross member right here that gets in the way of actually wrenching it. And then when you get it up there, you kind of got to get a little extension or a deep socket to get enough angle past the engine block to turn it. And then on top of that, you have this thing moving the whole time, unless you have a second hand helping you up front by holding the actual crank. So I was kind of fumbling around with it a little bit, but the best way it seems like is to get it right here near that spot right here on the bell housing and the engine side, and then that way you have a little bit of leverage to kind of press against that, because if you do it in any other way, you just don't have enough angle with this cross member. All right, so here's the 6 bolts that came out. They're pretty short, stubby 14s right there. There was one oddball black one, which was kind of surprising for me, because all the other 5 are just regular zinc coated ones, and then you got this one random black one, which is again not normal. I wonder if there was a significance for it, or just somebody grabbed the wrong one. All right, the next thing we need to do is disconnect the coolant lines. So I went ahead, disconnected the 2 brackets, the one that's to the bell housing here and the one in the front. They're held on by a 12 and a 10. The 10 latches it and the 12 holds it to the block or the bell housing. The main thing you need is the 17 flare. That's the one that takes apart the actual flare fitting. I have a 19 over here to hold that fitting so it doesn't break or snap on us for any reason, so that's more for leverage. So we'll go ahead and take that apart. Once you do that, you need to use some plugs to keep the fluid from dripping. I've got my pan here in case I lose any fluid or drip any fluid. All right, once we break it, you can pretty much turn it by hand. All right, we went ahead, got it off. I went ahead, put those 3/4 inch vacuum caps that I had right there to hold the top ones right here. I found an old transmission line that I had from one of my JZ swaps. I just went ahead, just looped that so I wouldn't drip any fluid. I barely dripped any out of there, maybe like an ounce or so. So eventually I'm gonna go ahead and do the whole change and flush on this transmission, so I'm not gonna worry about that. I might end up just pulling these lines out of the way, because right now they're kind of blocking everything, and since I have everything apart, I can pretty much disconnect the front, loop the same fluid lines up front just like this to keep it from spilling out, and then cap the front off while I have it out of the way. All right, we went ahead, got all those hoses and those tubes for the cooler lines out of the way, so it'll be a little bit easier to work with. Now I've got the jack all ready and set up. We'll go ahead, lift it into place, kind of secure everything down. I'm gonna go ahead and ratchet strap it. I don't think the chains that come with this thing are long enough, so once I get it up there, I'll ratchet strap it down, and then we'll start getting everything into place. The next thing after I get this thing kind of into place, I gotta go ahead and unbolt the mount right here. I'm gonna go leave the actual mount connected to the transmission, since I'm not really disconnecting anything and it's not really in the way of my lifting. And then I'm gonna just unbolt the little 12 millimeters that go go underneath into the mount, and then after that I'm gonna go ahead and take these guys off and then just pull the crossbar down, and that way once we do that, the whole back of the transmission will be unsupported except for the platform here. So underneath, I went ahead put a little piece of foam over here just in case we scratch up the pan or anything. I went ahead, strapped down both chains on both sides, and then just for safety, I went ahead put a ratchet strap in the middle just in case anything happens or it falls off and the two chains don't hold. But I think we're pretty secure on this as far as all that goes. So last thing we gotta do is the cross member right here, and we can start lowering this thing down. We got everything unbolted, ready to go. Moment of truth right now, the whole transmission is basically sitting on this jack right now, and just depending on this jack, we have two 14s up here on the bell housing still. I'm gonna go ahead, undo that. I'm gonna use this adjustment, slide the transmission off the thing a little bit just to see where this thing shifts, and then we'll see if we can lower it and it's balanced. What I'm worried about is maybe the tail end is a little bit heavier. That's why I try to slid it far back as far as I could. But hopefully I've got it in good equilibrium where the most of the center of gravity is on the center part right here, but we'll see how that goes. So I basically got everything ready to go. Took out the bell housing bolts. I put a stand back there just in case if anything happens or it falls out of alignment, but pretty much everything's sitting on the jack now. I'm going to try to shift it off that way using this horizontal adjuster to get it there, and let's hope for the best, guys. All right, we're clear of the flywheel in the thing. I'm gonna check the backside, make sure that we're good on there. I'm gonna lower that stand. Yeah, we're clear here. Slowly lower it. All right, I think we're good. I'm kind of balancing it, just making sure. So I think we're clear up there. Perfect. The transmission's resting on here. What I don't trust is the kind of teeter-tottering, but other than that, it is pretty solid. I might put something underneath here on the backside just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere when I slide it out of the way to work on this. But overall, I think there's a pretty good setup and pretty much a success so far as transmission removal. So inspecting the inside of the bell housing where the torque converter is, as you can see, there's not much most of the oil is actually on the lip of here and on the edge, so that's a good sign. That's a sign that the transmission itself is not leaking and there's not transmission fluid, and that's all oil. So this is basically what you have to clear out once you push back a little bit, just to clear that. And even getting it back in, that's usually the hardest alignment mark. So the balance of this got a little bit sketchy because that transfer case was much heavier, plus most of the transmission is right here. It was really back heavy right there, so I went ahead, put my right here my wood cribs. Those are what I had used to prop up my car to get it higher when I'm getting it on the lift. But I have built 4 of those for all 4 wheels, but I took 2 of them, stacked them there with some 2x4s just to balance this thing out and get the weight off of these things, because I didn't trust all these welds under here. But right now it's just sitting level and all the weight is on the back and then on the center of this thing, so we're good here. Yeah, but with the transmission removed with the max jacks, we are pretty limited as far as the height goes on my ceiling. This is as high as my ceiling goes for this vehicle. I can take the lift a couple more notches up, but the roof of the truck is going to hit the ceiling in my roof. But yeah, if I were to do a transmission work, I would have to separate the transfer case and the transmission and then somehow get this thing on a lower cart or something to get it out from under here. For the rear main seal, the next thing we got to do is take the flex plate off. These are 14mm star bits or 12 points, so we need to get those, kind of shoot all those off. Take this thing off, and then behind there we can get to the plate for the rear main seal. That's a huge plate on the back behind here that we need to take off and reseal. You can see the oil leak is basically coming from like around this area. Once we take the flex plate off, we can see better where exactly the oil leak is really coming from. All right, that was pretty easy getting that flex plate off. I tried to do it by hand, ended up just hitting it with the impact much quicker and faster. So what we need to do now, basically take apart those 10mm all around there. There's 7 of those, and then just take this whole thing out. The rear main seal is tapped into that, and you could remove it on the outside. You can see up there, that's the starter for this 2UZ motor, but a big pain in the ass to get to for that one. Overall evidence, you can see most of the leak, there's really nothing around the top here, no signs of leak. All it is along the bottom here, and the O-ring that goes right about here also fails, and then it basically fails with the forming place gasket behind there. So we'll go ahead, take those 7 out and pop that plate off and get it all cleaned up. All right, got everything out. We got those 7 bolts. I forgot the 2 down here. I almost really messed this up if I would have kept on prying, but luckily I noticed those 2. But yeah, those 2 on the bottom right there, you gotta get those out. Once you do that, it pries off pretty easily. But you can see my whole sludge mess from this engine. Even though it only had 120,000 miles when I bought it, they never changed the oil, so everything's just nasty sludge. All the seals are all brittle. All this forming place gasket is just all brittle. So one of the things I need to do is when I'm cleaning this out, I need to be careful just to make sure I grab all these little pieces and nothing falls into the engine. Just to make sure, you can always just clean the bottom here, put some masking tape right there just on these bottom ones, because if anything falls down, it'll just fall and then you can just suck it out from the top there. So on the top here, this is that O-ring that people always forget about. When you do the rear main seal on the 2UZ, you have to remember to get that O-ring, or else that's most likely your culprit that's leaking. Once it starts leaking there, it basically gets out and then it drips down and it leaks on the outside of the rear main, and it's really usually not the center right here. But when we clean this up, we want to make sure we clean everything around here, all of that, all this stuff with some brake clean, just to make sure everything is pretty clean back here. Right here is the back of that plate. On top, that's where that O-ring is, and see, you can see the kind of the evidence. It starts leaking up here, and then dirt and stuff accumulates right around that area, and then it kind of just finds its way down the side here, path of least resistance. You can see on this side it's pretty dry, so most of the leak was coming from here, and it just found its way down this way with all that residue right there. So all this stuff, I'm gonna go put it outside, soak it with some super clean and some diesel just to let it all dissolve so I could clean it up. This is that O-ring that we took apart on top of there. This thing is pretty much flat and it's just a brittle piece of plastic at this point. That's what is usually leaking out of this thing, but yeah, definitely all these seals on this motor were just gone as far as all the ones I've changed and touched so far. Alright, went ahead and cleaned this thing up with a little bit of diesel. I soaked it for a couple hours, scraped off all the old residue and old gunk that was in here, so we got pretty much clean. So everything underneath is clean. On the back side, just wiped it all down. I just tapped that rear main seal out with a screwdriver. You can see that channel in there is a bit dirty, so we'll go ahead and clean that up right there before we put the new seal in. So like I mentioned earlier, as long as your number is the same as the new one, the BH4036, you're good. You can see the old one that we took out was a G, and remember earlier when I showed you the new one, there's slight variations when they make improvements to them, so they'll increment the letter. So that one's an H, but overall it's still the same one because it's got the same numbers. All right, now that I got everything cleaned out, I went ahead and cleaned that race out. Make sure we scrubbed it all down with some super clean and some brake clean just to get all that gunk out. Pretty much cleaned everything else ready to go. Next thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go ahead and tap in the new rear main seal. So we'll just go ahead and tap this in. I'm using basically a PVC 4-inch pipe right here. This is the end that came out of the machine side. I'm gonna use that to not damage it and also tap it in evenly all around. I'm gonna go ahead and just put it on the ground here. Basically put it between these 2x4s and then get some spots so I could hammer it in. When you hammer it in, make sure we only tap it flush. You don't want to go too far in. Luckily on this one, there is a lip to prevent you from going too far in, but on the 2JZ and some of the other motors, it doesn't have that. So you just gotta be careful depending on what you're doing it on. But for this one, there is a stop on the back end, but you just want to be flush when you tap it down. All right, once we tap it in, make sure everything's flush all around the edges like it is when we took it out. You could check on the back side, make sure everything is spaced pretty evenly and that you're not all the way in on the lip. And we're pretty much good on this, so we'll go ahead, put the form in place gasket on here and prepare the other side to make sure that side is clean. On the underside here, I made sure to clean everything up. I scraped all the old form in place gasket I could off the edges. I went ahead, sprayed it down with some brake clean just to clean all the surfaces. I also went ahead and cleaned all around here with brake clean to make sure this surface is good. Next thing I'm gonna do is just clean everything with acetone before we put the seal on here or put the plate with the seal on it. Make sure you get this edge right here too, because that's very important as far as sealing also. I went ahead and cleaned everything with acetone, make sure it was clean. We went ahead, put the new O-ring in. That O-ring that comes from the factory, it's a little bit bigger than the inner diameter, but it does fit in if you squeeze it on the outer diameter, and it's actually holding pretty still, which is good. One of the things is when you put the form in place gasket, it actually goes underneath here. It doesn't go over the top, so that thing does seal over the top. That's probably one of the reasons why that thing leaks, because there's no form in place gasket. Only that O-ring is the gasket on that surface right there. And then since we're not removing the lower oil pan, we want to make sure we put a bead of form in place gasket here, because when we put the plate on, we have to make sure it gets a seal down here. So when we do that line on here, we basically have 5 minutes to get it all onto here, get the bead on the other side, on the underside, and then get it all in place before this stuff sets. So one of the things you gotta keep in mind is there's grooves all around it where you actually lay it into it, but around the holes you wanna go on the inside curve. And the top, there's a double hole right there, or a double groove, you wanna do that. So I'll post the actual picture of the service manual that shows you the line to do it, but it's pretty straightforward if you know what I'm talking about. We wanna seal the inside of all the bolts and the dowel pin. On the other one. As far as torque requirements, those 10 millimeters, all they need is about 71 inch-pounds. That is not much force. It's basically hand tight. As I go through, I'll go ahead and post all the torque settings that we go through. So the first thing we need to do is the flex plate. So like all 8 of those bolts, it looks like they want you to go 36 foot-pounds on those, and then after that do another 90-degree turn, which, dang, that seems like a lot. But also you need to remember to put some red Loctite on all those bolts as you put them in. All right, we got everything in, tightened all those bolts in a cross pattern, tightened this one on the bottom. If you didn't notice, what I did was I put it in place once it hits the dowel pins right here to line up. I screwed these 2 in just to kind of force it horizontally into the block, and then I loosened them and I went ahead and tightened these down because I want this part to mate with the upper oil pan here and seal with that form in place gasket we did. And then we went ahead and went over the top over there just to tighten all that around so that everything's good all around that spot. So we're pretty much sealed up and everything is overly sealed. I think we got that new O-ring, all new form in place gasket. I put that assembly lube around here, just you can see the squeeze coming out of there, but that's just to help it on initial startup. So we'll go ahead, put everything back together as far as the flex plate, and go ahead and time lapse through all this. That way I'm not explaining anything. Everything goes back the same way you put it in, just the reverse direction. All right, we went ahead, got everything back on. Those things was a 36 foot-pounds to torque it initially, and then they mentioned a 90-degree after that. I couldn't get it to 90 degrees. I got it maybe 30, 35 degrees. So these must be stretched out already because, you know, we're not using brand new ones. That spec must be for new ones because there's no way you're gonna go 90 degrees on used ones that are stretched anyway. All right, we were able to get the transmission back up in there. Got all the mounts up. You guys saw me. I'm gonna go ahead and put the torque specs as I tighten everything down. We'll go ahead, make all the wiring connections now, reconnect everything, go ahead, all the flywheel bolts onto there, torque those things down. All right, before we put the exhaust back on, you gotta remember, change your gaskets. These usually deteriorate. You wanna replace them with new ones. They're pretty cheap, whether they're aftermarket or OEM. I think aftermarket, they're like $2 or something like that. So I started looking at it again, and actually the green ones, the green ones belong in the middle, because if you look at the green one, the metal edges, they're basically the same or very similar right there. And then these two are closer to these guys, which have been superseded. That explains why I have 4 of these. I originally ordered 2 more for here, and I had 2 already, so that's why I didn't order it. And on this one, I had ordered an extra just because they were so cheap. I just want to have one laying around in case I ever have to take off the exhaust again. All right, I went ahead and put everything back together. Went and tried to road test this thing. I thought I screwed something up royally when I put it down, and I couldn't put it into gear and it wouldn't move. And I spent all this time troubleshooting, checking all my linkages, checking everything, and then I freaking realized this thing was in neutral right here. So if you ever do a transmission removal and put it back in, make sure you're in high gear when you put it back together. I was in neutral, and I kept on, one sign of it is when I was trying to go from reverse to park, it was grinding like I messed something up really bad. Got me down the rabbit hole of troubleshooting and checking all my work and checking all my linkages and just making sure everything was tight and correct and plugged in. And then after I messed around, I realized it was this freaking crap right here. So just remember, put this thing in high gear. Hey guys, thanks for joining me all the way to the end of this long ass video, but at least we got the rear main seal done. We learned how to remove the transmission. We got all that stuff cleaned up underneath. If you guys found this video useful, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to your channel, go ahead and subscribe to your channel. Stay on top of all my different projects on all the different cars I work on, whether it's on the GX, the ISs, the Sienna, the golf cart, the garage, whatever I'm doing. If I can do it, you guys can do it. I want to thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you guys next time.